The execution he tried twice. Alan Miller's chilling final hours. In Alabama's Holman Correctional Facility, one man's story became a test case for justice, science, and human endurance. Alan Eugene Miller was no career criminal. He was quiet, withdrawn, a truck driver whose paranoia simmered beneath the surface until one August morning in 1999, when it erupted into shocking violence. Convicted in just 20 minutes, Miller's path to death row seemed swift, but the journey that followed was anything but. His first scheduled execution in 2022 collapsed in chaos when officials failed for hours to find a vein. 2 years later, the state tried again, this time with an untested method that would turn his final moments into a spectacle the world could not ignore. His last meal was simple. His final words were defiant. But the manner of his death left haunting questions behind. Tonight, we step inside his final 24 hours, where silence gave way to struggle. Miller was not the type of man who stood out in a crowd. A truck driver in Pelham, Alabama, he was remembered as a loner, quiet, withdrawn, and deeply paranoid. His family had long noticed his struggles with mental illness, but he never received the treatment he needed. Instead, his thoughts turned dark, and his fears of people whispering behind his back grew unbearable. On the 5th of August, 1999, that paranoia exploded. Miller walked into his workplace, Ferguson Enterprises, and shot 2 co-workers, Lee Holdbrooks and Christopher Yancey. Minutes later, he drove to another business, Post Air Gas, where he gunned down his former supervisor, Terry Jarvis. 3 men were dead within the hour. When arrested later that day, Miller was strangely calm, telling officers, "They were talking about me." His confession left little doubt about what had happened. At trial, his lawyers briefly considered an insanity defense. Experts testified that Miller suffered from serious mental illness and likely experienced a dissociative episode during the killings. But Alabama's laws and the lack of effort from his defense team sealed his fate. In just 20 minutes, the jury convicted him, and a judge imposed the death penalty. For more than 20 years, Miller lived in the shadows of Holman's death row. His cell was small, his world reduced to concrete walls, steel bars, and the occasional sound of distant footsteps. Inmates described him as quiet, pacing endlessly in his cell, rarely speaking. But the state of Alabama never forgot him. His name stayed on the execution list, moving slowly through the appeals process. Until, in September 2022, the state was ready to carry out the sentence by lethal injection. That night, Miller was led into the death chamber, strapped to a gurney, and prepared for execution. But what followed was chaos. For nearly 3 hours, prison staff jabbed his arms and hands, trying to find a vein. They tied him down, poked repeatedly, even attempted to raise his body on an angle to make the veins stand out. Nothing worked. By midnight, the deadline had passed. Miller was returned to his cell bruised, bloodied, and traumatized. That night, the state failed to kill him. After that botched attempt, Miller sued the state, demanding he never face another lethal injection. Alabama agreed, but in doing so, they chose something untested: nitrogen hypoxia. The idea was simple in theory. Replace the oxygen in a person's mask with pure nitrogen. Within seconds, the brain would lose consciousness. Within minutes, the body would shut down. Officials promised it would be swift, painless, and humane. But there was a problem. No one in U.S. history had ever been executed this way. Alan Miller would become only the second man in modern times to die with nitrogen gas. The 26th of September, 2024. Alan Miller awoke knowing it was his final day alive. His execution was scheduled for 6 p.m. Guards moved him through the prison quietly, their steps echoing against the concrete floors. When offered his last meal, Miller requested something simple: a hamburger steak, a baked potato, and French fries. There was no dessert, no elaborate request, just food that reminded him of ordinary life, one last taste before the extraordinary end. Throughout the day, Miller remained mostly silent. He did not meet with large groups of family or friends. His ties to the outside world had long since faded. Only a spiritual advisor remained close by, offering him prayers and comfort as the hours ticked away. At 6 p.m., Miller was escorted into Alabama's death chamber. The room was cold, sterile, the gurney positioned under harsh fluorescent lights. Witnesses filed into a viewing area: reporters, officials, and a small number of observers. Miller was strapped down, his arms pinned to his sides. A clear mask was placed over his face. sealing tightly against his skin. When asked if he had any final words, he spoke softly. "I didn't do anything to be in here." Whether it was denial, delusion, or defiance, those words were his last. At 6:16 p.m., the gas began to flow. The state claimed Miller would lose consciousness within seconds. But what witnesses saw told another story. Miller's chest heaved violently. His hands twitched against the restraints. His head jerked back as his body convulsed. For 2 long minutes, he struggled, straining against the mask, desperate for oxygen that wasn't there. Then came the gasping, loud, ragged attempts to breathe. His body fought for nearly 6 more minutes, pulling in nitrogen, suffocating slowly. His face twisted in anguish. His limbs shook. His body contorted. Reporters in the witness room described it as one of the most disturbing executions they had ever seen. Finally, after 8 minutes of visible struggle, Miller went still. At 6:38 p.m., he was pronounced dead. Alan Eugene Miller's execution was declared a success by Alabama officials, who insisted nitrogen hypoxia had worked as intended. But witnesses told a different story. They described agony, not peace. Struggle, not serenity. Miller's spiritual advisor, Dr. John Munch, said afterwards, "I've seen many people die. This was not peaceful. This was suffering." Miller became the 1,600th person executed in America since 1977, and only the second by nitrogen gas. His death reignited fierce debate across the country. Was this justice or cruelty disguised as law? What made his case even more haunting was his mental illness. For decades, doctors had warned that Miller's delusions shaped his actions. He lived in paranoia, trapped in a mind that blurred reality and fantasy. Yet none of that mattered in the end. The state chose to silence him not once, but twice. First, with a botched injection, then with a gas mask. Dear friends, Alan Eugene Miller's story is not just about a crime, a trial, or an execution. It is about a system that failed him long before he pulled the trigger. A system that ignored his illness, denied him treatment, and then chose to kill him in a way no one had tested before. His last words, "I didn't do anything to be in here," echo not as a statement of innocence, but as a haunting reminder of a broken mind. His final minutes, filled with violent convulsions, will be remembered as a chilling experiment carried out in the name of justice. In the end, Alan Eugene Miller's story forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths. Justice, in its purest form, is meant to protect and to heal, but what happened in Alabama was something far more unsettling. A man plagued by mental illness, failed by every system that could have helped him, became both a killer and an experiment. His crimes left families shattered, lives stolen in moments of paranoia and rage. Yet his execution raised questions that will not fade. Was this punishment, or was it spectacle? Was this closure, or was it cruelty wrapped in procedure? Dear friends, when the state claims a life in such a way, the echoes linger far beyond the prison walls. They reach into our homes, our hearts, and our conscience. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. Don't forget to subscribe, so together we can keep exploring the hidden truths behind prison doors.